Okay, hello. So, if you're new to the channel, I use data to answer questions that are mostly stupid, sometimes serious, and today we're looking at superhero TV shows. So I, like many others, finished watching Wandavision a few weeks ago, and during those early episodes, I kept thinking, man, this is so refreshing. I haven't seen anything like this. And then, as more episodes came out, it started feeling more and more familiar to me. You know, a show about an overpowered individual suffering from mental trauma that's packed with surreal imagery that makes you question the very reality the show is presenting. And then watching the characters in the show undergoing those same realizations as you, as their relationships start to strain with one another. Where have I seen that before? Yeah, WandaVision was basically Legion with a sitcom aesthetic. And that's not to say it's bad. I loved Legion and I enjoyed WandaVision. But that deja vu experience I had when watching it wasn't the first time I had experienced it. See, I was also reminded of Legion when I watched Doom Patrol, another show that was weird and stylistic and focused on a core group of dysfunctional, superpowered individuals and dove into the mind and often used surreal, hallucinatory imagery to depict what was going on in the mind of these characters. And then when I watched Umbrella Academy a bit later, I was again reminded of Legion and Doom Patrol. Again, a dysfunctional, surreal superhero show that first and foremost dealt with mental health and relationship dynamics, and the superpower stuff was sort of side dressing to that core emotional story. So there's clearly a new emerging trend in superhero shows. These new shows typically center around someone who's crazy overpowered and could wipe out all of humanity, but are usually dealing with very human issues that either stem from mental health, family, or other significant relationships, and trauma in general. These shows' aesthetics are also very similar. They have the typical bright colors that you'll see in most superhero shows or movies, but they also feature very visually imaginative and very surreal, I've said it before and I'll say it till the end of this video, surreal sets that help depict that inner turmoil that our characters are going through. And all in all, making these shows very weird and seemingly destined to be cult classics. And I'm not the only one to comment on the similarities between these shows. People most often make the connection between Doom Patrol and Umbrella Academy because they literally released on the same day. But if you go to any of the subreddits for these shows, you'll find loads of people recommending another one of these shows. People saying, hey, if you liked Doom Patrol, you'll love WandaVision. Or if you liked WandaVision, you'll love Legion, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on and on and on. And to really understand why these shows are so similar, we first need to take a look at comics history. I know, but I promise it'll be brief. So, in 1963, both Doom Patrol and X-Men were introduced in DC Comics and Marvel Comics, respectively. Basically, since these characters' inception, there's been a lot of confusion surrounding the similarity of the two teams. They both featured a team of superpowered misfits, and they both had wheelchair-bound leaders. Now, the first issue of Doom Patrol came out slightly before the first issue of X-Men, but realistically, they came out too close to one another to definitively say that X-Men is a ripoff of Doom Patrol. What we can say is that both of these comics were a response to what was popular at the time. The mega success of Fantastic Four made comic publishers realize that, hey, maybe our readers are interested in more than just superhero brouhaha. Maybe they want to see more character moments and understand the group dynamics of a superhero team. Now, the main characters of Legion and WandaVision are both a part of the X-Men lineup, and the main characters of Doom Patrol are obviously part of the Doom Patrol lineup. So yeah, these three shows are pulling from source material that is very similar, so it makes sense that the shows would be similar to one another too. So, Crazy Jane, who I would say is one of the main characters in the Doom Patrol TV show, is introduced in the comics at a later point in its run, in 1989 specifically. And her introduction was somewhat of an inflection point for Doom Patrol, because this was around the time that Grant Morrison took over the characters in Doom Patrol and started playing around with really wacky ideas and characters, many of which made it into the TV show. Now, if your adolescence was any similar to mine, you'll know who Gerard Way is for a very different reason, but he is the creator of Umbrella Academy, and he is also a huge fan of Doom Patrol, specifically the version of Doom Patrol when Morrison was writing it. Gerard Way clearly wore this influence on his sleeve because the Umbrella Academy comics feel very much like Doom Patrol from the Morrison era. So again, it's natural that the show would reflect those similarities and feel similar to Doom Patrol, the TV show. So the source material for all of these shows is sort of interconnected through various ways, which I thought was interesting. That answers the question of why these shows are similar in concept, at least. But why do they all feel and look the same? So to answer this question, I went to IMDb and scraped the name of every single person involved in the production with each of these shows. I'm not just talking about actors or directors and writers, I'm also talking about the people who did visual effects, makeup, the stunt coordinators, the casting, the music. If it was listed on IMDb, I have it in my dataset. And I did this because I had this hypothesis that these shows were pulling from the same talent pool. And I was right. So in total, there are 155 people who worked on at least 2 of these shows. Cece Ice is a stunt person, and she worked on Doom Patrol, Wandavision, and Legion. That's 3 out of 4. Travis Reinke is a visual effects guy, and he worked on Doom Patrol, WandaVision, and the Umbrella Academy. Again, 3 out of 4. I wasn't able to find anyone who worked on 4 out of 4 of the shows, but these 2 stood out to me for obvious reasons. Everyone else in the dataset only worked on 2. So again, there are 155 people in this dataset. 57 of those people are just visual effects people. So it's clear that these shows are hiring from a lot of the same talent pool when it comes to visual effects. And that intuitively makes sense. When you're watching these shows, a lot of the visual effects seem similar to each other. Then again, if you look at all of the people that are involved in these shows, not just the people who are involved with multiple shows, there are in total about 1,300 people who worked on visual effects, which is of course about 425 people per show, which is crazy. That's a lot of people. I did not realize that these shows require that much of VFX work. Switching gears, when you look at directors, there's 2 who are involved in a number of these shows. So Ellen Kuras directed 1 episode of Legion and 4 episodes of the Umbrella Academy. And Jeremy Webb directed, again, 1 episode of Legion and 3 episodes of the Umbrella Academy. So that at least tells me that the people who are behind the Umbrella Academy maybe looked to Legion as an inspiration and looked at the people who were behind that show and wanted to bring that influence into their show. Because if you look at these numbers, like Ellen directed 4 episodes, Jeremy directed 3 episodes, that's not an insignificant amount, especially when you look at the data set in total and you realize that most directors typically only direct 1 episode and then leave. If you're directing more than 1, it's clear that you were able to input a lot into the show and really carry out your vision. And of course, there are crossovers in other departments, so special effects, makeup, like I said before. When you look at the writing credits, you'll see names that will look very familiar if you're comics fans. Jack Kirby, Stan Lee, and Steve Blackman. This is, again, emphasizing the point that I made a few minutes ago, which is that these shows are drawing on very similar source material. There's even a couple of actors in common across the shows. So Alan Heckner was both Bump Weathers in Doom Patrol, and he was Agent Monty in WandaVision. And then you have Brent Bailey, who was both Doug in Doom Patrol and did some camera and electrical work on WandaVision. But this name really called to me. I was like, I couldn't place where I knew him from. And then when I looked it up, I realized, oh, he is Alex from Emma Approved. I don't know how obscure of that reference that is because none of my friends watched that show growing up, but I know all of my audience is extremely online, so maybe some of you will have heard and have watched Emma Approved, and I hope I just unlocked a lot of memories for you, if that's the case. Okay, so that answers that question. There's some overlap between the crews for each of these shows, but why are these shows all getting greenlit at the same time? It's easy to see why producers might feel like they need to change things up a bit because we are drowning in superhero entertainment. Back in the day, When Heroes came out, I ate that shit up. And a lot of other people did too, because there was nothing else like it on television. And then when one of the first comic book to TV adaptations came out, The Walking Dead, I again ate that shit up. And again, I was not the only one who fell in love with that show. Both Heroes and The Walking Dead were immensely popular and were early indicators of the impending landscape of comics and superhero-driven TV shows. I bring this up because I was the type of kid who would have killed for a show like The Flash or Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. to be on the air. And now that I live in a world where both of those shows not only exist, but are mainstream and are pretty good, I barely keep up with either of them. Superhero fatigue is nothing new. It's been talked about to death. But I find that this conversation rarely brings up superhero TV shows, which is strange because there's a lot of them. So I made this bar graph of superhero TV shows. Each bar represents a live-action superhero TV show that was introduced in that year. And I scraped this data from Wikipedia, so there might be more superhero TV shows, but I found this list to be comprehensive. So according to that list, the first show introduced was The Adventures of Superman in 1952, and then more than a decade later, you had Batman. But really, the craze didn't really pick up until 2012, which was when we saw the release of Arrow, which was, of course, incredibly popular and launched its own mini-universe that's separate from the movies, but we'll get there. So following the success of Arrow, we saw Marvel release Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which tied into the MCU and was exciting at the time. There was a big idea of cross-media storylines and like big characters would show up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Of course, that never happened, but that was the talk of the time when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. dropped. And then the year after that, DC doubled down on the so-called Arrowverse and expanded with The Flash, which was heavily connected to the storylines and characters in Arrow, and then also introduced Gotham and Constantine, which were a part of the same universe, but were a bit more separate than Arrow and Flash. And then you started to see more indie publishers, at least when it came to movie and TV show adaptations, enter the stage. So you have Image Comics, which of course previously made waves by releasing The Walking Dead. Image Comics released 2 more TV shows, which were Powers and then Fear the Walking Dead, a sequel to their flagship series. And then you had Dark Horse entering the race with their show called Dark Matter. DC introduced another show to the Arrowverse lineup, which was Supergirl, and then the Marvel and Netflix shows started to drop. So you got Jessica Jones and Daredevil in one year, and then Agent Carter, which was a spin-off of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And the trend just continued to skyrocket. You saw the Marvel Netflix universe expand with Luke Cage and The Punisher, and what's that other one? Iron Fist. The one no one watched. And then The Defenders was the ultimate culmination of that. And then you had DC further expand with Legends of Tomorrow. And you also saw shows that are separate from the continuity. So like shows like Legion, shows like Runaways, shows like The Inhumans. And then on the DC side of things, you had shows like Krypton and all the shows that started getting greenlit thanks to DC Universe. So Swamp Thing and Titans. Ugh. And you also had the Watchmen show on HBO. People were starting to experiment more with superhero properties and what was possible. And then, of course, you have the shows that I've been talking about in this video: Umbrella Academy, Legion, Wandavision, and Doom Patrol. But here's the main takeaway from this graph. As is the case whenever a market is flooded with more of the same thing, interest in that thing starts to die down. So each of the shows in the Arrowverse premiered on the CW. So we have access to the ratings data. And I graphed the ratings for each of these shows by season for the first time it aired. So Arrow and The Flash, when they first debuted, were on par with each other. Season 1 of Arrow and Season 1 of Flash got the same number of views. For both shows, each season after that got consecutively less views, but that tends to be a trend for television shows at large. Legends of Tomorrow was the next show to be released in the Arrowverse lineup, and that show got significantly less views than Arrow and Flash. So whereas Arrow got around 4.14 million views for its first season, and The Flash had about 4.8 million views, Legends of Tomorrow only had about 3.2 million. And then you have Supergirl, which, how can these numbers be real? Almost 13 million people watching the first season of Supergirl? I'm skeptical. but okay. But with the exception of Supergirl, every show that premiered after The Flash had less views on the first season. And every show had consistently less views with each season as it went on. Arrow just concluded, like, fiend, it's done. When you consider how many people grew up with this show, you would think that at least 1 million people would tune in to the epic conclusion of this 8-season long saga. But no, only 0.8 million people tuned in to watch the last season live. And all of these trends are more obvious when you take a look at this graph, which is the same data but graphed by season instead of by year. Just drives the point home further. Each season has less views than the previous season. Now, there is another factor that may be affecting these trends here, which is that people in general have shifted away from cable since 2012. So, for example, a lot of people watch Arrow or The Flash on Netflix, and those views wouldn't be captured in this data. This is just people who watched it real time as the season was premiering on the CW. So maybe you could argue that the views aren't going down because people are losing interest, but rather people are watching it on different platforms. However, the same trend that we saw for the Arrowverse exists for the Netflix Marvel shows. Now, Netflix is notoriously stingy with its viewing data, so I can't exactly make a graph for the Netflix Marvel shows like I did for the Arrowverse shows, but according to an analytics firm named JumpShot, viewership was down for every single show that premiered after Jessica Jones and Daredevil, which is legitimately the same thing we just saw with the Arrowverse shows. And on top of that, JumpShot had said that the view counts for each season after the first season for all of the shows were down. I think it's pretty safe to say that the graph for Netflix Marvel shows would look pretty similar to the graph for the Arrowverse shows. And that's a claim that is further corroborated by the sudden cancellation of all of the Netflix Marvel shows. Now, I know sometimes it feels like Netflix cancels shows out of thin air and it was entirely unwarranted and please, dear God, just bring American Vandal back. But in the case of the Netflix Marvel shows, I think a lot of us saw the writings on the wall. Even though they were critically acclaimed, it was clear they weren't commanding the same level of interest that they had when the first season dropped, and that was abundantly clear when The Defenders came out and no one watched it, even though it was supposed to be like the epic crossover event of the Netflix Marvel superheroes. So I think in this scenario, at least, we can conclude that the Netflix shows weren't doing well. So my hypothesis here is that producers saw this trend. They saw what was happening with the Netflix Marvel shows, and they saw what was happening with the Arrowverse shows, and they thought maybe they needed to reinvent the wheel a little bit. And of course, television is the perfect place to start experimenting because the budgets are so much lower. They can safely see what works and what doesn't work to bring back viewers without having to net $1 million loss at the box office. And this is my hypothesis because we've seen this happen before in other genres. I would argue that the genre most analogous to the superhero films of today is the Western genre. You know, several decades ago, the Western was the equivalent of a blockbuster film where you would mostly go to watch the spectacle and the action. You wouldn't go watch a Western for like really intense character arcs or really emotional stories. But as time went on and Westerns started to get more popular and eventually came to saturate the market, you started to see directors experimenting with the themes that are explored in Western films. Suddenly you saw Western films tackle colonialism and criminal justice and American exceptionalism. And now, decades later, Western films that come out are considered prestigious, not blockbusters. In fact, most Western films that have come out in recent years were nominated for a Best Picture or a Best Screenplay or a Best Director, etc. Oscar. I'm talking films like Django Unchained, Brokeback Mountain, No Country for Old Men, True Grit, or The Revenant. Like, these movies are all awards contenders. And on the TV side of things, you've got Breaking Bad and Westworld, which are two of the most heady, complex TV shows to have come out in recent years. What we're seeing with superhero TV shows are the growing pains of a genre. Another example I want to throw at you is police procedurals. You know, those shows that investigate a different crime with each episode, and there sometimes are storylines that carry over several episodes, but typically each episode is a contained narrative. These shows dominated our TV screens pretty much from the 90s until now. Law and Order, NCIS, CSI, The Wire, you've bound to have heard of one of them and probably had one in the background as you were growing up. When these shows were at the peak of their popularity, we started to see them spin off into extended universes and have interconnected stories among the different series. Which, hey, that sounds familiar. And in recent years, as the popularity of the police procedural has started to die down a bit, we've seen, again, the genre turn itself on its head. You know, they started to be more comedic. Think Castle or Monk or The Mentalist or Psych. All of these were detective shows, but also were accentuated by very quirky characters and had humor as a core component of the series. Those shows were all early indicators to what we have now, which is Brooklyn Nine-Nine, a police procedural that leans fully into the sitcom genre and is an all-out comedy at this point. And I would expect these shows to evolve even more as attitudes towards police and criminal justice have greatly vacillated in the past year. So yeah, Marvel has a whole bunch of shows coming out this year, and now that DC Universe has folded into HBO Max, I'm sure we'll be seeing more superhero content there. We'll continue to see shows that push the boundaries of the genre, maybe to the point where those shows don't even resemble these early iterations, which I'd be here for. I'm ready to see something new. I don't know what that will look like, but I just wanted to make this video to point it out that, hey, I noticed this trend. And I hope 5-10 years down the line, I can point to this video and say, I told you so, because that's my ultimate goal in life, to be right. But that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed. What did you think of WandaVision, if you saw it? Or have you seen Legion, Doom Patrol, or Umbrella Academy? I think out of these four, Legion is the one that's the most underwatched, which is a shame because it's my favorite out of all of them, and I think everyone should give it a watch. So let me know if you do. Go watch it and then come back to the comment section and give me that engagement and tell me what you thought. But yeah, give this video a like as well, subscribe, hey, maybe even hit the bell. I don't know what you're thinking, but I would appreciate anything that you do regardless. If you like this video, you might enjoy the video I did on Rotten Tomatoes about a month or so ago. I think I hit on a lot of similar themes there. Themes? What am I? Screenwriter? No, I think I hit on a lot of similar points there. And I will catch you all in the next one.